I discovered my fiancé was only marrying me to clear his financial troubles, so I walked down the aisle with a special guest who had a perfectly legal surprise waiting just for him. I still remember the night he proposed. The way the candlelight flickered across the rooftop terrace, casting a golden hue on the elegant dinner he had arranged. The city skyline stretched out behind him, the distant hum of traffic merging with the soft melody of a live violinist. It felt surreal, like a scene from a romance movie. "Marry me," he had said, his voice steady yet laced with what I had mistaken for nervous anticipation. His hands, warm and confident, held mine. As he slipped a sparkling ring onto my finger, I should have noticed the signs. Even then, the way he glanced around, almost as if making sure we had an audience. The urgency in his proposal, as though waiting another month, another week, was out of the question. But love, as they say, has a way of painting over cracks, making flaws appear as charming quirks. I had said yes, without hesitation. The weeks that followed were filled with nothing but bliss. Wedding planning, cake tastings, floral arrangements, it all blended together in a whirlwind of excitement. Friends and family gushed over how lucky I was to have found someone as charming, as devoted, as utterly perfect as him. And I had believed them. Looking back, I realized now how expertly he had played his role. He was attentive, remembering every little detail I mentioned in passing. He knew my coffee order by heart, surprised me with handwritten notes, and always seemed to be exactly what I needed. Supportive when I was stressed, affectionate when I was feeling distant. But there were moments, fleeting as they were, where doubt crept in. Like the time he had taken an urgent phone call and had stepped away so quickly, I barely caught the shift in his expression or the time. I had suggested a prenuptial agreement, a mere formality, and his response had been far from what I had expected. He had laughed, but there was something tight about his smile. "You think I'm marrying you for your assets?" It had been a joke, of course, or so I had thought. I had brushed it off, convinced myself that love didn't require such things after all. After all, we were a team, two people stepping into a future together. But love shouldn't come with secrets. The first real crack in the illusion appeared at an upscale charity gala. We attended together. It was a dazzling event filled with business tycoons, socialites, and investors, discussing opportunities that stretched across continents. I had stepped away to greet an acquaintance when I overheard a snippet of a hushed conversation. "He's in deep. If he doesn't find a way to settle soon, it's over." I turned just enough to see my fiancé's face. Tension carved into every feature. He wasn't the one speaking, but he was listening, nodding stiffly as an older man patted his shoulder in a way that felt more like a warning than reassurance. That night he was different, distracted, restless. He barely touched his drink, his fingers tapping against the table as though his mind was elsewhere. "What's wrong?" I had asked, but his smile was back in place before I could press further. "Just work things." He had said, kissing my temple, nothing to worry about, and I had let it go. Weeks passed and the wedding countdown ticked closer. Every little doubt I had buried beneath excitement, beneath love, began to resurface. He had always been ambitious, yes, but suddenly his interest in our financial matters had grown more specific. "How much is your trust fund worth?" "Again, you never told me who manages your accounts. Do you think merging our finances after marriage would be easier?" It was subtle at first, wrapped in innocent curiosity, but each time there was a weight behind his words, a carefully hidden urgency. And then there were the moments where I would catch him lost in thought, staring at his phone for long stretches, typing out messages before deleting them entirely. One evening he had excused himself abruptly from a dinner with my parents, stepping outside to take a call. He had left his phone on the table, the screen lighting up with a message I wasn't meant to see. "I need more time. I'll have access to everything soon." My stomach had tightened, my mind racing through possibilities. Who was he talking to, and what exactly was he gaining access to? I had meant to ask him, but I couldn't, not without proof, not without knowing for sure. So I had done the one thing I never thought I'd have to do in a relationship built on trust. I started looking for answers myself. One evening, while he was in the shower, I sat on the couch in his apartment, absently scrolling through emails on my phone. That's when his laptop screen flickered to life, a notification popping up in the corner, finalizing the plan. "Her assets will be yours soon." My breath caught in my throat. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I should. I clicked the email opened, revealing an entire conversation spanning weeks. My fiancé had been working with a lawyer, crafting a way to legally bind my assets to him the moment we were married, a carefully structured agreement, one that would ensure my inheritance, my investments, and every account in my name would be easily accessible to him. The words blurred together as I scrolled, and then there was another name, a man I didn't recognize. The email thread continued detailing how my fiancé had borrowed money from an investor in New York. Large sum, promising huge returns, but he had failed. The deal had collapsed, and now he was being pursued for the debt. He had no way of repaying unless he married into wealth. Unless he married me, I sat frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. The world around me felt suddenly different, like I had stepped into a reality where everything I believed was a carefully crafted lie. I thought of every moment, every conversation, every smile he had ever given me. Had any of it been real, or had I simply been a means to an end, a tool to clear his financial ruin? Anger rose sharp and undeniable, but beneath it, something else emerged. Resolve. I could have confronted him then and there. I could have screamed, demanded explanations, watched as he fumbled for excuses. But that would be too easy. He had played a game now. It was my turn, and I was going to make sure he never saw it coming. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The email's words were burned into my mind. Each sentence confirming what my instincts had been whispering for weeks. My fiancé was orchestrating a calculated deception, one designed to strip me of everything the moment we exchanged vows. And worse, he wasn't just manipulating me. He was doing it out of sheer desperation. A man from New York, a name unfamiliar yet ominous, was closing in on him. A man who had invested in him, believing in his false promises of success, only to be left chasing a shadow. My fiancé had taken the money, failed spectacularly, and now he was scrambling for an escape. That escape was me, a hollow laugh built in my chest, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was the time for strategy. I reached for my phone, quickly taking screenshots of the emails and forwarding them to myself. If he was willing to deceive me this thoroughly, I needed every ounce of leverage I could gather. My hands trembled slightly as I locked his laptop and placed it back exactly as I had found it. He couldn't know I had seen anything, not yet. The sound of water stopped. I straightened immediately, forcing my breath to even out as I moved back to the couch, pretending to scroll through social media, as if my entire world hadn't just shifted. A moment later, he emerged from the bathroom, a towel draped over his shoulders. His usual easy smile in place. Missed me, he teased, leaning down to press a kiss to my temple. I looked up, my own smile. Automatic, rehearsed, flawless. Always a game of pretend. The next few days passed in excruciating slow motion. I went through the motions, finalizing wedding plans, trying on my dress, attending tastings and fittings, all while carrying the weight of a secret that threatened to crush me. He was none the wiser. If anything, he seemed more relaxed than ever, likely believing that his future was secured. But every conversation, every lingering touch, every whispered, "I love you now," felt like an elaborate act, a performance meant to ensure his payday started. Watching him differently, not as my fiancé, not as the man I once loved, but as an opponent in a high-stakes game. And while he may have been playing for my money, my assets, my security, I was playing for something far greater: justice. But first, I needed confirmation. I began my quiet investigation, tracing the breadcrumbs his emails had left behind. I started with the mystery man from New York. His name was listed in the emails, and with a little digging, I uncovered enough to piece together the story. He was an investor, one with a strong reputation, known for funding rising entrepreneurs. My fiancé had been one of those ventures, convincing the investor to back a business deal that had collapsed spectacularly. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. The business had never been sustainable. It had been a glorified attempt to flip funds, a reckless gamble on an industry he knew nothing about. The investor had warned him, but my fiancé had been overconfident, refusing to listen. burning through the money faster than he could recover it. When the business failed, he disappeared. No repayment plan, no accountability, just radio silence. He'll know. I found news articles about the investors, past dealings, including legal disputes with previous business partners who had crossed him. This wasn't just someone sending empty threats. This was a man who made sure he got what was owed, and now he was after my fiancée good. The last puzzle piece fell into place on an ordinary afternoon, just a few days before the wedding. We were having coffee together, sitting in the corner of a quiet cafe. He was texting, his attention flickering between his phone and our conversation as though managing multiple crises at once. I watched as he typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, I took a breath and leaned in slightly. "What's got you so distracted?" I asked, keeping my tone light, teasing. "Wedding stress," he smiled. But it was tight. Something like that, just making sure everything is in place. Place everything? I tilted my head, figging curiosity, like what? He hesitated only for a fraction of a second, but I caught it just last minute. Logistics, bank stuff. I took a sip of my coffee. My expression unreadable. He didn't elaborate because he couldn't, because he was lying and I was done pretending not to see it that night. As he slept beside me, I made my move. I had already gathered every document, every screenshot, every piece of evidence that confirmed his intentions. Now I needed to set the stage for his downfall. I reached for my phone and made the call that would change everything. The New York investor picked up on the second ring. "This is unexpected," he said, his voice sharp and controlled. I took a breath. "I have information about the man you're looking for." There was a pause, and then the shift, a quiet intensity, settling over the conversation. I'm listening. The next 24 hours were a blur of strategic phone calls and legal consultations. The investor and I worked out an agreement. He had evidence of financial misconduct, but what he lacked was a way to expose it publicly, in a way that lured consequences. That's where I came in. The wedding was the perfect setting, a room full of witnesses, cameras rolling a stage built for a grand reveal. "I want to do it at the ceremony," I told him. There was a brief silence before he chuckled. "You're bolder than I expected." I smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. I learned from the best. The night before the wedding, my fiancé pulled me close, whispering about how excited he was for our future. I let him hold me, let him press a kiss against my forehead, let him believe he had already won because by this time tomorrow he wouldn't have a future left to look forward to. I lay still, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breathing beside me, his arm draped carelessly over my waist. The warmth of his touch, once comforting, now felt suffocating. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing through every meticulous detail of the plan. He thought he had won. He believed tomorrow would mark the beginning of his comfortable, debt-free life, wrapped neatly in the security of my name, my assets, my trust. He had no idea that by this time tomorrow, his entire world would unravel. I closed my eyes, willing myself to relax, to play my role one last time. He shifted beside me, murmuring in his sleep, his breath brushing against my skin. I forced my body to remain still, matching the rhythm of deep, even breathing, letting him believe I was lost in peaceful slumber, and if he had even the slightest inkling of what was about to happen, he would run, but he wouldn't, not yet. Not when he believed he was so close to securing everything he wanted. The morning sun broke through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. His hand traced lazy circles over my back before he kissed my shoulder. "It's almost time," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. "I can't wait to finally call you my wife." I turned toward him, eyes filled with faint affection, and smiled me too. The morning was a blur of preparations, and my dress was fitted perfectly, the intricate lace draping elegantly over my frame. The makeup artist worked in quiet efficiency, soft curls falling over my shoulders, as I sat in the mirror watching my reflection. My heart should have been racing, my hands trembling, but I felt nothing, just cold, unwavering. Focus outside guests were arriving, their laughter and conversation filtering through the open windows. The grand venue adorned with delicate flowers and golden lights, stood as a testament to the illusion he had so carefully crafted. He had planned every detail to perfection, ensuring it would be an event people would talk about for years, just not for the reasons he had imagined. The ceremony was set outdoors, overlooking a pristine lake. Rows of chairs lined the aisle, guests dressed in their finest attire, murmuring in admiration at the altar. He stood tall, exuding confidence, his suit pressed to perfection, a picture of the devoted groom. His gaze scanned the crowd, nodding at familiar faces, his chest swelling with pride. The music swelled, signaling my entrance. I inhaled slowly, stepping forward, the sound of my heels tapping against the marble floor echoing in my ears. All eyes turned toward me, admiration shining in their faces, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. My hands remained steady as I walked, my expression unreadable. He smiled as I neared, reaching out for my hand as if claiming victory. And then I spoke. "I have a surprise for you." A flicker of confusion crossed his face quickly, masked by amusement. "A surprise," I nodded, turning slightly as the crowd murmured in curiosity. From the far end of the aisle, a man stepped forward, dressed in a crisp suit, his gaze locked on the groom. The whispers grew louder, confusion spreading through the crowd. As recognition dawned on my fiancé's face, his body tensed, his hand dropping from mine, a shadow of panic flickering across his carefully composed features. "Meet your guest," I continued, my voice carrying through the hushed silence, "the one who has been waiting a long time to see you." The man stopped a few feet away, sliding his hands into his pockets with deliberate ease. "We finally meet again," he said, his voice calm but laced with something undeniable. My fiancé took a step back. "What is this?" His voice wavered slightly, his eyes darting toward me, searching for an explanation. "An escape." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Oh, just someone who has been looking for you." I figured since we're starting a life together, there shouldn't be any secrets. The businessman reached into his jacket, pulling out a neatly folded document and holding it up. "I believe you owe me, view." Something he said, and I think your lovely fiancé has already uncovered everything. The tension was suffocating. Guests exchanged looks of confusion, whispering amongst themselves. My fiancé's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his carefully curated world crumbling before his eyes. "You think you can do this here?" he hissed, his voice low, but shaking with barely concealed panic. I met his gaze, holding it steadily. "I can, and I just did." His breathing turned ragged, his composure slipping. "This isn't the place, isn't it?" I interrupted, my voice steady. "You wanted a perfect wedding, didn't you? A moment for everyone to see the life you were about to build? Well, here it is. Everyone gets to witness the truth now." The businessman unfolded the papers, skimming over them before looking up. "We can either handle this quietly, or I can involve the legal system. Either way, this conversation doesn't end here." The color drained from my fiancé's face. He looked around, his confidence shattered, his mind scrambling for an escape, but there was none. His lies had been stitched too tightly into this moment, and now, under the weight of reality, they were unraveling. I took a step forward, my voice dropping so only he could hear. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out, that I would just sign away everything without question?" His eyes flickered with something desperate, something unspoken, but I had no interest in hearing his excuses. I turned away, reaching for the ring on my finger, sliding it off effortlessly, holding it between my fingers. I examined it for a moment before extending my hand. "This doesn't belong to me anymore," I said, my voice carrying through the still air. He didn't move, didn't reach for it, so I let it fall. The small metallic sound echoed like a final note in a tragic symphony. A murmur spread through the guests, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. The event that was supposed to be the grand celebration of love had turned into something else entirely, something far more unforgettable. I turned to leave, stepping away from the altar. My heart light for the first time in weeks. The air felt different, crisp with the weight of justice. I walked past the rows of stunned guests, past the flowers and golden lights that no longer held any meaning, and as I reached the doors leading away from the spectacle, I glanced back one last time. He stood frozen, surrounded by everything he had built on lies, watching as it collapsed around him. And then I walked away, never looking back the moment I stepped outside. The weight in my chest lifted, replaced by something lighter, something almost exhilarating. The air felt different, charged with the energy of a decision well made behind me. The murmur of stunned guests and the echo of my fiancé's unraveling humiliation carried through the grand doors of the venue. His world had just collapsed, but mine was just beginning again. Walked down the marble steps without looking back, feeling the sun warm my skin. As the last remnants of my so-called perfect wedding faded behind me, a black sedan was parked near the entrance, and as I approached the door, opened with smooth precision, the businessman from New York sat inside, watching me with the quiet patience of a man who had waited a long time for this day. I slid into the seat beside him, closing the door firmly behind me. The hum of the car's engine was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding inside. I could picture my ex-fiancé now, his face, pale hands shaking, eyes sting around for a way out that didn't exist. He had spent months crafting a web of lies, only to be ensnared by it himself. The businessman studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a knowing nod, he reached into the leather briefcase beside him and pulled out a neatly organized stack of papers. "It's done," he said, his voice steady. "The legal case is moving forward. His assets will be frozen and the courts will decide the rest." I exhaled slowly, letting the reality sink in. He had no escape now. Not only was his financial ruin inevitable, but his reputation, the one thing he valued above all, was in shambles. The whispers would spread, business associates would distance themselves. His name would become synonymous with deception. I turned to the businessman, meeting his gaze with quiet gratitude. "Thank you for trusting me with this," I said. "I know this could have played out differently," he smirked, shaking his head. "I'll admit I didn't expect you to go through with it in such a spectacular way." He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "Most people in your position would have walked away quietly. Maybe handled things in court, but you—" He chuckled. "You gave him a downfall. No one will forget." I smiled faintly, though there was no real amusement in it. He played me for a fool. I wanted him to feel that same powerlessness. The businessman nodded as if he understood perfectly well. "If it's any consolation, I doubt he'll recover from this any time soon." He handed me another document, this one a letter of formal notification. "Once this is filed, the legal process will be out of our hands. But I don't think you'll need to worry. He doesn't have much left to fight with." Took the papers, my fingers brushing over the embossed letterhead. It was poetic in a way. He had tried so desperately to claim my future as his own, only to lose everything in return. The car pulled away from the venue, merging into the quiet streets beyond. The weight on my shoulders lessened with every passing second. I had walked into that wedding prepared for war, and I had walked out victorious. There was no sadness, no second guessing, just a profound sense of closure. As the city passed by in a blur outside the window, I let my thoughts drift back to how it had all begun. The moments I had ignored the red flags disguised his charm, the manipulation hidden beneath whispered promises. It was astounding how much a person could overlook in the name of love. He had been so confident, so sure that I would never suspect him, but he had underestimated me. That was his fatal flaw. The businessman tapped his fingers against the armrest, breaking the silence. "So what's next for you?" I glanced at him, considering the question for so long. My life had been tangled up in him, in wedding plans, in the illusion of a future that no longer existed. But that was over now. I was free in a way I hadn't been in months. "Maybe years. I start fresh," I said finally. "And I make sure no one ever tries to take advantage of me again." He nodded approvingly. "Smart." He glanced out the window, then back at me. "You know, if you ever need connections in the business world, I know people who could help. You're sharp. I imagine you'd do well in this game if you ever decided to step into it." I smiled, shaking my head. "I think I've had enough games for a while." The car slowed at an intersection, and I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. I looked the same, Yet entirely different, the girl who had walked into that wedding in a white dress prepared to pledge her life to a man who had deceived her no longer existed in her place. Was someone stronger, someone who had taken back control. Turned back to the businessman, but I appreciate the offer, he smirked. Keep my number, you never know when you might need a friend in high places. The car pulled up to my building and the driver stepped out to open my door. I gathered the documents, smoothing out my dress, before stepping onto the sidewalk. The businessman didn't say anything as I turned to leave, but there was something in his gaze, approval perhaps, or maybe just understanding. I walked inside without looking back. Upstairs in my apartment was exactly as I had left it, untouched. Peaceful, I slipped off my heels, my fingers brushing against the engagement ring, still sitting in my palm. I stared at it for a long moment before walking to the window, where the city stretched out before me. Then without hesitation, I placed the ring on the table and turned away. It no longer belonged to me. The chapter was closed, the game was over, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly free. I stood at the window watching the city pulse with life beneath me, a sharp contrast to the eerie calm settling over my thoughts. The engagement ring lay on the table, a silent testament to the illusion that had once been my future. It no longer held meaning. Just a symbol of a lie, expertly woven by the man I had nearly married. But today, the lie would collapse. The morning air was crisp as I stepped outside the city, buzzing around me as if unaware of the storm brewing just beneath its surface. The weight of my gown, draped elegantly over my shoulders, its white silk a contradiction to the darkness of my intent. The wedding venue loomed ahead, adorned in flowers and soft golden light, as if preparing for a fairy tale. But this wasn't a love story. I walked through the grand entrance, the hum of conversations floating through the air, laughter mixing with the clinking of glasses. Familiar faces turned toward me, smiles stretching across, lips, eyes gleaming with excitement. They saw a bride radiant and poised, ready to pledge forever. None of them knew the truth. Hidden behind my practiced expression at the altar, he stood tall, his suit pressed to perfection, a confident smile playing on his lips. He thought he had W. He believed he had played me so well that I was walking toward him willingly. Unaware of his deception, he was about to learn how wrong he was. The music swelled, filling the space with an almost cinematic grandeur. As I moved forward, my hands remained steady. My steps measured, he reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. But I didn't squeeze back. His brow furrowed slightly, but the moment passed quickly as he turned toward the officiant, eager to seal the deal. He had so carefully orchestrated. Just as the officiant began to speak, I pulled my hand away. A murmur rippled through the guests, confusion flickering across my fiancé's face. I turned slightly, my gaze locking onto a figure at the far end of the aisle. The businessman from New York stepped forward, his movements deliberate, his expression unreadable. The whispers grew louder, my fiancé stiffened beside me, the confidence in his posture faltering before we begin. I said, my voice carrying through the room, clear and unwavering. There's someone here who has been waiting a long time to see you. The businessman stopped a few feet away, sliding his hands into his pockets, his presence exuding quiet authority. He didn't need to speak for the tension to thicken. My fiancé inhaled sharply, his jaw tightening, realization hitting him like a crashing wave. I tilted my head slightly, watching as the color drained from his face. You didn't think I'd find out, did you? A hush fell over the room, all eyes bouncing between us, the festive atmosphere morphing into something colder, something far more unsettling. The businessman reached into his jacket and retrieved a folder, flipping it open with an almost lazy precision. You disappeared on me, he said, his tone casual. Almost amused, vanished into thin air, thinking you could escape what you owed. He turned a page, then glanced up. But it looks like you found another solution, didn't you? My fiancé SW swallowed hard, his body tense. This isn't the time, I stepped forward, cutting him off. Isn't it? I challenged, my voice unwavering. You planned every detail of this day, every guest, every moment. Why not add one more unexpected twist? His gaze darted between me and the businessman, his mind scrambling for a way out. But there was none. The businessman held up the documents, shady business dealings fabricated, financial reports debt so high you needed a convenient way to wipe them clean. He paused, smirking. And what better way than marrying into money? The gasps that followed were sharp, the weight of the revelation crashing through the room like a breaking tide. My fiancé turned toward me, desperation creeping into his expression. This isn't what you think. He started, his voice lower. Strained, I arched a brow. Oh, then what is it? He opened his mouth, but no words came. I reached into my gown's hidden pocket, retrieving my phone with a tap. I projected the email thread onto the venue's large digital screen. Messages appeared in sharp contrast against the elegant backdrop, damning evidence for everyone to see. Finalizing the plan. Her assets will be yours soon. You still owe me, don't think I've forgotten. Pay up soon, or things get messy. 1 year of marriage, and I'll be free, then I can leave and keep everything. The crowd's reaction was instant gas. Murmurs, heads shaking in disbelief. His family looked horrified. Guests exchanged looks of shock, and his business associates leaned in, whispering among themselves. His mask shattered, his carefully constructed world unraveled before his eyes, and I watched as panic settled into every inch of his frame. You did this, he hissed. Stepping closer, his voice barely audible beneath the rising tension in the room. I tilted my head, amusement flickering in my gaze. No, I corrected, my voice smooth. Calm, you did this? I just made sure everyone saw it. The businessman took a step forward, holding out a separate document. This, he said, waving the paper, is a legal notice. We're moving forward with the case. Your accounts will be frozen, your assets under scrutiny. He smirked. I imagine this isn't quite the wedding gift you were expecting. My fiancé's hands clenched into fists, his breath coming in sharp, shallow inhales. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, suffocated and inescapable. He had played his game well, but I had played better. The efficient, now visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should... There's nothing more to say, I interrupted. I reached for the engagement ring, sliding it off my finger with ease, holding it between my fingers. I examined it for a brief moment before extending my hand toward him. This belongs to you, I said. My voice carrying through the stunned silence. He didn't reach for it, didn't move. I let it fall. The soft clink as it hit the marble floor was deafening. I turned toward the crowd, exhaling slowly. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said. My tone light, almost amused. I certainly will with that. I walked away past the altar, past the stunned guests, past the life I had almost been trapped in. The doors swung open as I stepped into the cool evening air, the weight that had once clung to my chest lifting entirely behind me. The whispers turned into murmurs, the murmurs into shocked conversations. He was left standing alone at the altar, surrounded by the ruins of his own making. I didn't look back. Not once. I stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapping around me like a long-awaited embrace. The weight that had pressed against my chest for weeks had lifted, replaced by a steady calmness I hadn't felt in a long time. Behind me, the grand doors of the wedding venue remained open, the golden glow of chandeliers spilling onto the marble steps. The whispers had already begun, rippling through the crowd like waves after a storm, each guest trying to piece together what had just unfolded before them. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders dissolve. It was over. The illusion had shattered, and with it so had his carefully constructed world. But I wasn't done yet. The businessman stepped beside me, adjusting his cuffs as he watched the scene inside. I have to admit, he said, his voice etched with amusement. You have a flair for the dramatic. I smirked, crossing my arms as I glanced back at the chaos I had left behind. He deserved nothing less. Inside, my ex-fiancé still stood near the altar. Frozen in place, his eyes darted between his family, his business associates, and the guests desperately trying to salvage whatever dignity remained. But there was none, the moment the emails had flashed across the venue screens. The whispers had turned to gasps, and those gasps had become murmurs of disbelief. His parents were the first to react. His mother, once so enamored with the idea of me joining their family, now looked at him with open disappointment. His father stood rigid, jaw clenched, exchanging quiet but sharp words with him. his disapproval evident even from where I stood. His friends, the ones who had always laughed at his charm and wit, had shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some already turning away, pretending they hadn't been part of the spectacle at all. But it was the investors, his business associates, who truly sealed his fate. They weren't whispering, they weren't murmuring, they were watching him with the kind of quiet intensity that sent chills down a person's spine, the kind that meant the calculations had already begun. The numbers running in their heads. He had spent years convincing them that he was a man of strategy, of intelligence, of careful planning. Now they had seen the truth for themselves. He wasn't strategic. He wasn't careful. He was reckless, and no one invested in Renus. I saw the exact moment it hit him. His breathing quickened, his hands twitched, his mind scrambling for an exit, for something, anything to salvage the situation, but there was nothing left to hold on to. The weight of his actions had collapsed in on itself, leaving him standing in the wreckage. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He turned. Then eyes scanning the room, searching for me. A flicker of something desperate crossed his expression. I held my ground, my hands steady at my sides, as he stepped forward as if to close the space between us, to fix what had already broken. Beyond repair, he opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, the businessman beside me spoke, his voice cutting through the thick silence. "Whatever you're about to say, I wouldn't waste your breath." My ex-fiancé froze his gaze, snapping to the man who had up until now been a ghost from his past. The businessman smirked slightly, his posture relaxed, but his presence imposing. "I think we've heard enough from you for one night, don't you?" My ex-fiancé's hands clenched into fists. "This isn't your business. It became my business the moment you took my money and ran the business." Man interrupted smoothly, his voice calm, measured. "But I have to give you credit. The wedding con was a creative touch. Too bad you didn't count on her being smarter than you." The words hit like a slap, the final nail in the coffin of his already shattered pride. The guests, now silent, waited for his response, but none came. What could he say? That he hadn't meant for this to happen, that he had been caught off guard. There were no explanations left, no justification strong enough to erase what had been exposed tonight. For the first time, he truly looked cornered. The businessman sighed, glancing at me. "Well, I think that about covers everything, doesn't it?" I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. I'd say so without another word. He turned and walked away, leaving my ex-fiancé standing alone in the center of the room, surrounded by people who now knew exactly who he was. I took a step forward, closing the remaining distance between us, my voice low enough that only he could hear. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" His jaw tightened, his eyes burning with a mix of emotions, anger, regret, humiliation. But there was no apology in them, just frustration that he had lost. I tilted my head slightly. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said softly, my tone laced with finality. And then I walked away. I could feel his gaze burning into my back, could hear the rustling of movement behind me as guests murmured amongst themselves. But I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The damage was done as I stepped out into the night once more, the cool breeze washing over me. I finally allowed myself to exhale the tension, the uncertainty, the weight of the betrayal. It all melted away. This was closure. This was justice. The businessman, waiting by his car, gave me a nod of approval. "You handled that well?" I smirked. "I had a good teacher," he chuckled, opening the door to his car. "Something tells me you won't be needing my lessons anymore." I watched as he drove off, the taillights disappearing into the distance. The city stretched out before me, alive with possibilities untethered from the past that had once held me captive. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the engagement ring, one last time before I slipped it onto the ledge of a nearby fountain. It caught the light for a brief moment before vanishing. Beneath the water surface, lost to the city, to time, to the memories that no longer had a hold on me, and as I walked away, leaving it all behind, I knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The sound of the fountain's gentle trickle faded behind me. As I walked away, my steps lighter than they had been in months. The engagement ring was gone, lost beneath the rippling water, along with every illusion I had once clung to. There was nothing left tying me to him except the final piece of the plan. I had set in motion the legal case the businessman had already left, but his presence still lingered in the back of my mind. His calm confidence, his understanding nod, satisfaction in his smirk when he saw my ex-fiancé downfall play out in front of everyone. I had done something no lawsuit alone could have accomplished. I had exposed him publicly, irrefutably. Now the world knew exactly who he was, and that knowledge was far more damaging than any legal document could ever be. But this wasn't over. I reached into my clutch, pulling out my phone as I made my way toward the waiting car. A few missed calls blinked on the screen, most from numbers I recognized: former friends, distant relatives, people who had been at the wedding and were now desperate for details. I ignored them. There was only one call I needed to make. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number the businessman had given me earlier. The attorney handling the case. I pressed the call button and lifted the phone to my ear. It rang twice before a smooth, professional voice answered. "Miss Carter, I was expecting your call." I slid into the back seat of the car, exhaling slowly. I assume everything is in place. It is. The lawsuit has been formally filed as of an hour ago. Your ex-fiancé's financial records will be frozen, pending investigation. There's already been movement. One of his business partners pulled out of a pending deal upon hearing the news. I let my head rest against the seat, staring out at the city lights as they blurred past the window. He had built his entire life on charm, on trust, on the belief that people wouldn't dig too deep. But now the people he had counted on were turning away one by one. What about his personal accounts? I asked the attorney. Hesitated. Those will be audited as well. But given that a significant portion of his assets were tied up in investments, the damage has already been done if he was hoping to use your financial resources as a safety net. Well, that option is no longer available. A faint smile tugged at my lips. Good, I should warn you. The attorney continued, his tone shifting slightly. You're not going to go down quietly. He'll fight this. I closed my eyes, considering the words. Of course he would fight. He wasn't the type to accept defeat, even when it was staring him in the face. He would scramble, make calls, try to salvage whatever reputation he could still cling to. But it wouldn't matter. The damage was irreversible. Let him, I said. Finally. The more he fights, the more attention he brings to himself, and the more attention he gets, the faster his empire collapses. There was a brief pause on the other end, then a quiet chuckle. Remind me never to end up on your bad side, Miss Carter. I smirked, noted the call ended, and I let the phone rest in my lap. Outside the car continued weaving through the streets, carrying me further away from the wreckage I had left behind. I imagined him now back at the venue, his hands gripping his phone, his mind racing through possible escape routes, but there were none. The lawsuits would drag him through months, maybe years of financial turmoil. His investors had already started pulling out, and once word spread, any remaining business ties he had would vanish. He would be left with nothing but the consequences of his own choices. I didn't need to watch it happen. I had done what I can to do. The car slowed as we reached my apartment building. I stepped out, my heels clicking softly against the pavement. The doorman nodded in greeting, holding the door open as I walked inside. Everything was exactly as I had left it, untouched. Quiet mind, I made my way up to my floor, slipping off my shoes as I stepped into my living room. The city stretched out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, vast and endless. It was strange how different the world looked when you no longer carried the weight of someone else's deception. My phone buzzed again, another call. I glanced down, his name flashed across the screen. For a moment, I simply stared at it, at the name that had once meant so much, at the person I had nearly given my future to. Then I let it ring. Eventually, it stopped. Replaced by a voicemail notification, I didn't listen to it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it would say. Excuses, explanations, desperate attempts to rewrite history. But history had already been written, and I had no interest in revising it. I placed the phone face down on the table, exhaling slowly. The game was over, and I had won. I stared at my phone, his name still lingering on the screen long after it had stopped ringing. The voicemail sat unopened, a silent plea from the man who had once convinced me that our future was built on love. But love had never been part of his plan. Only deception, only strategy now. The very foundation he had tried to manipulate had crumbled beneath him, and he was reaching for anything to stop the inevitable fall. I wasn't going to catch him. The city outside my window stretched endlessly into the night. The distant hum of life moving forward, uncaring of the spectacle that had just played out. I let the thought settle over me, how insignificant he had now become in the grand scheme of things. His calls, his excuses, his regret, if there even was any, no longer mattered with a quiet exhale. I reached for my phone, deleted the voicemail without listening to it, and blocked his number. There was nothing left for him to say that I needed to hear. I turned away from the window, letting the silence of my apartment wrap around me. It was strange, this quiet. For so long my mind had been a storm filled with suspicion, heartbreak, anger, and strategy. Now there was only stillness. Not emptiness, not loss, just the space to breathe. Again the next morning, the world had already moved on. I stepped into a cafe near my apartment, the scent of fresh coffee curling through the air as I waited in line. A couple stood ahead of me, laughing softly, hands intertwined, lost in their own world. I watched them for a moment, not with bitterness, but with a quiet understanding. Once I had believed in a love like that. Now I simply knew better. The barista handed me my coffee, and as I turned, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face on one of the CAF-mounted televisions. A news segment played the headline, running in bold letters across the screen. Businessman faces legal trouble following public financial exposure at wedding event. I took a sip of my coffee, allowing the warmth to spread through me as I watched the screen. There he was, my ex-fiancé, his image frozen mid-stride as reporters crowded around him outside a courthouse. His jaw was clenched, his posture stiff, every ounce of his once effortless charm now strained beneath the weight of scrutiny. A news anchor spoke over the footage, summarizing the case that had erupted in the aftermath of the wedding. Investors had begun pulling out. Partnerships were dissolving and legal battles were now imminent. His carefully built empire, built on charm, lies, and borrowed time, was collapsing faster than he could salvage it. I wondered how it felt to have the world see him for who he truly was. The screen switched to an interview clip. One of his former business partners speaking with calculated professionalism. Trust is everything in business, the man said. His tone cold, and once it's broken, there's no rebuilding it. I smiled slightly. Turning away from the screen, the final blow had landed. I walked out of the cafe, stepping into the bright morning light, the weight of the past officially behind me. There was no need to dwell on his downfall. I had done what I needed to do, and I was free. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the warmth of the morning sun kissing my skin. As the world bustled around me, the air smelled fresh, untouched by the chaos I had left behind. People moved past, engaged in their own lives, oblivious to the storm that had passed through mine. It was over for the first time in what felt like forever. There were no schemes to unravel, no betrayals to unearth, no plans to execute, just silence, a new beginning waiting to unfold. I made my way through the city streets, each step lighter than the last. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, a carefully orchestrated performance where every move had to be calculated. But now I had nothing left to plan, nothing left to fight for. I had one. My ex-fiancé was exactly where he deserved to be, trapped in the mess he had created. His face was everywhere. Every news outlet had picked up the story. His once polished image now stained. Beyond repair, investors had withdrawn their support. Lawsuits were piling up, and his carefully crafted empire was crumbling beneath him. I was finally free of him. As I turned the corner onto a quieter street, my phone buzzed in my pocket for a brief second. I thought of ignoring it, assuming it was another message from someone wanting details about the wedding disaster. But when I glanced at the screen, a familiar number flashed, a number I hadn't expected to see again, the businessman. I hesitated before answering. Didn't think I'd be hearing from you again. A quiet chuckle came through the line. I wanted to make sure you saw the news. I glanced at a passing newsstand, my ex's face plus across the front page. The headline read, "Prominent Businessman Faces Financial Collapse After Public Exposure." I saw. I said, continuing to walk, "H.E.K. done he is. Oh, you really finished him off." I let the words settle. I had expected satisfaction, maybe even a rush of victory, but all I felt was certainty. This was the ending he had earned, the consequences of every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to take what wasn't his. So I said, stopping at a crosswalk, "Why the call?" There was a slight hesitation on the other end before he spoke again. "I've been in this industry long enough to know when I see someone with potential." I raised an eyebrow. "Potential for what? For handling business?" He said simply. "You didn't just expose him, you outplayed him. You knew when to strike, when to wait, and when to make your move. That's not something everyone can do." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I have connections," he said. "People who could use someone with your instincts if you're interested." I smiled to myself, amused by the unexpected turn. "Are you offering me a job?" "Let's call it an opportunity," he replied smoothly. "You're smart, and more importantly, you're ruthless when you need to be. That's valuable." I thought about it for a moment, the possibilities stretching out in front of me like an open road. I had spent months being the target of someone else's ambition. Maybe it was time to start carving my own path. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Do that," he said. "And if you ever decide you're ready, you know where to find me." The call ended, leaving me standing at the edge of a new beginning. I took a deep breath, letting the past fade behind me as I stepped forward. There was no rush to decide, no urgency pressing against my thoughts. For now, all that mattered was this moment I had walked through the fire and emerged stronger, and for the first time in a long time, the future was entirely mine.